Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Instrumental Breakthroughs podcast, where we explore the psychedelic origin stories of your favorite rock and roll superheroes. I'm your host, Daniel Shankin. I'm also the founder of Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration. Tam Integration is a community of people who are deeply committed to transformation and healing, and who also just so happen to like plant medicines. We gather together for various circles, sharing circles, educational events, and the like. Coming up on April 16th to the 19th, you can celebrate Bicycle Day with us. We're having an event called the Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration Family All-Star Jamboree, which will feature not only researchers, but therapists and shamans and musicians and comedians and live painters and lots of fun stuff. And you can learn more about that if you go to psychedelicintegration.family. And so that's, I would like to thank Deadheadland. You're watching this on Deadheadland TV. Thanks to Brian Markowitz. Please go to Deadheadland on Facebook or in all the social media channels. And there is music and programming all day, every day. And you can support them on patreon.com/Deadheadland. You can also support Tam Integration on Patreon as well. And I think those, and thank you to Skylar of Livestream Remote for providing tech support. If you need tech support for your live events, check out livestreamremote.com. So those are our ads. Got through them pretty quick. I think 2 minutes of ads, not too bad. I'm very excited to have today's guest. I'll just read her bio and then we'll jump right in. Teresa Gabriel has 20 years of experience on her musical, spiritual, and creative journey. A singer, guitarist, composer, music teacher, medicine woman, and facilitator of workshops and retreats related to the voice. She's hosted more than 20 sold-out workshops organized at the Fauno House in Sintra, and in recent years also of medicine retreats as well. She has 3 albums released called Heartquake, Rites of Passage, and Inner Voice, and has collaborated on many more albums with many other artists. In 2007, she founded the Synergy Project in Portugal, which is the first conscious events production company in Lisbon, and collaborated with the Convergence Project in 2012, as well as with the Free Seeds campaign, which was a march against Monsanto and against the privatization of water and things of that nature. With hundreds of concerts in Portugal, including doing the first part of, you opened for Beth Gibbons in the Coliseum of Lisbon and Porto, and has also performed at festivals in England, Spain, Mexico, Netherlands, Hungary, Italy. Truly an international force. And is also, you also teach music and organize workshops which merges yoga, shamanism, and music therapy. She has collaborated with artists such as Jamie Woon, Estes Tone, Freedom Cafe, and Bacalhau, Sarah Tavares, Terracotta, Sergio Walgood, and among many more from lots and lots of different genres. Her work spans many genres, as well as working with sound, dance, music therapy, holistic awareness, and alternative teaching. She's currently finishing the creation of a soundtrack for a film on water with a Nicaraguan producer, Tamara Montenegro, and collaborated with some international producers such as Kraut, Mosé, J-Pool, and Mushina, with releases with publishers all across the world like Numa, Shika Shika, Random Collective, and Shango Records. Thanks for being here, Teresa.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invite. Very happy to be here and share.
So we were talking about a lot of things before we got switched on to the world. I am just curious, of all of the things that we just mentioned, all of the things that we just listed, what's really standing out for you right now? Did that bring back any sort of memories or, fond thoughts of all of the things that you've worked on over the past 20 years?
Well, it definitely made me integrate the parallel that exists between my inner world and my creative and professional path, and I owe that a lot to psychedelics and the dream world. And
Hmm.
and yeah, it's like it's beautiful to see this chronology and to see that it's very important to follow our dreams, and most of
Hmm.
those things were inspired by dreams. And yeah, I'm very grateful for everything, for all the
So they're
cycles, for all
inspired by dreams. And when you say dreams, are you talking about psychedelic experiences, or are you talking about like just straight up real life your dream world?
both. Both. I think it's a frequency, I think
Hmm.
ultimately it's the same frequency, whether it comes when we are awake or asleep. It's just like
Hmm.
this radio frequency that exists on a consciousness level.
Hmm.
Yeah, from our soul, and our soul that's connected to the Great Spirit as well.
Since we start with stories, and I really like this interplay between, well, so sometimes when you hear people say, oh, well, it happened while you were on psychedelics, it's not real. And so those of us who kind of know, our psychedelic reality, we know that that's not true. But then here you are also having these significant experiences as well that are not psychedelically induced. And you're talking about this frequency that comes from your soul. Let's just start with where you started tapping into that, psychedelic or not.
Um, well, I started writing down my dreams when I was 12.
Hmm.
I always had very vivid dreams and prophetic dreams since I was a child. And when I was 12, I started to write them down. And that made
Hmm.
me access, to develop my rapid access to my oniric memory. Because when we write down our dreams, this is for everyone who wants to tap into it. Like when we write it down, as soon as we wake up, we create synaptic connections between our neurons, and we start accessing everything much quicker. It's like an upgrade to our RAM memory. And then when I was 19, my best friend gave me mushrooms, and that was my first experience. I didn't know what it was.
Hmm.
He just told me that I would love it, and I trusted him because he was such a good friend. But I hadn't read much about what it was. I just went full on into the experience without any previous programs or readings or on other people's experiences. I just had my own experience, and that really opened me up. Yeah, I'm a hypersensitive, um, but the mushrooms made me even more sensitive. I was very aware of colors, of sounds, and I had a very cathartic experience. I had a very entheogenic birth,
Hmm.
and it opened me up, like it really opened me up, like my heart and my mind, the way I would see things, my perception. Like it was like it's like I had like like lenses over my eyes, and then it's like everything was removed, and I was seeing everything and feeling the vast expanse for the first time in my life, feeling really tiny and huge at the same time. And that was my first psychedelic awakening. It was very spontaneous
Hmm.
and life altering. Yeah.
Right. And then how do you feel like your dream work kind of prepared you for that in some way? That you maybe had more facility in the dreamlike world of the mushroom space because of your dream work?
I think so. Yeah, I think because of my dreams and my sensitivity, I was already familiar with that state of dissolution, into the whole. So
Hmm.
when I experienced that awaken, in a when my brain changed, that state, and I was awake, it was quite fun to navigate that and be playful with it and learn
Hmm.
from it and listen as well. I was already into meditation. At the time, I had a spiritual teacher, and I had already done some mindfulness retreats at the time. This was about 20 years
Hmm.
ago. So I was kind of like aware of what was happening, and I went really deep into it. And I made sure I made the best of it. So I also gave myself moments to really go deep into meditation, to really just listen to what the entheogen was speaking to me, even though I was not aware of what it meant, like the word entheogen. I understood the process that was happening inside of me, the awakening that was happening.
Will you tell me more about the process? Will you go one level deeper into that?
I was watching a concert at the time, and it was a Ben Harper concert when I felt like my perception was like phew, everything was opening up, and I started to listen to the words of the song, and I started to cry, like of beauty and of happiness and of gratitude. I felt this state of like, oh, I love music so much, and I love my friends so much, and with this feeling of like being part of something, and crying, just being squeezed, feeling my heart chakra being squeezed into this surrender of how beautiful life is. So
Hmm.
it was a very heart opening moment and very emotionally cleansing.
Right. And was it, how did it inspire you?
Well, it inspired me to be very playful with life and be very open, because I had come from some period in my life in which I had some trauma in relationships and some PTSD from an experience that I'd had. So it really kind of like dissolved a lot of fears, a lot of this feeling of holding myself back that I had carried up until then. So it was like I was being squeezed out of my shell of my conditionings, and it was my perception was being cleansed. So it made
Hmm.
me go forward with a lot of things in my life, a lot of dreams that I had up until that time, and also being fearless in my music and my performance and singing. It just brought me back to a state of trust. Yeah, just
Excellent.
trust. Yeah.
And so, one thing that we do know, and I want to make sure our listeners know too, is that, psychedelics aren't really like a silver bullet. It's like you can't take them and just necessarily expect all of our trauma to go away right then and there.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you are comfortable sharing some of like the healing journey that happened afterwards. Because on one hand, I'm hearing that you got very inspired to like, put your music out there more and like do these amazing projects that you're doing. But then we also know, like, on the other hand, there's stuff that has to be cleaned up and healed.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for me, it's been a very deep research, and I've been doing this for 20 years. It started with mushrooms. I also was a part of some San Pedro ceremonies, the cactus, and also with ayahuasca. I work with ayahuasca for 12 years. Also, I've had a long process of healing with ayahuasca, and I think that the most important thing is the intention with which you partake in a psychedelic experience. If you
Hmm.
have a pure intention and you're in a ceremonial context with people that you trust, it's much easier to feel safe enough to dive
Hmm.
into those stories and those traumas and allow the plants to teach you, because ultimately the plants are the teachers, not the facilitators. The
Right.
facilitators there to support you, to guide you, to make you understand what is happening, because of course some moments are overwhelming. uh, and yeah, it has, but the plants are the teachers, and that's the most important thing, is that it's, and also the plants show you things, but it's what you do after in your life that creates the healing. The plants are like a window, they're like a chemical key that shows you how to
Hmm.
see things. But then it's your decision in your practical 3D life, your choices, how you love yourself, how you integrate the information that you receive,
Hmm.
that create your healing. It's always your responsibility. The plants are
Right.
just there to support you and give you love.
So what are some of the things that you do to integrate that healing? When they give you, I have a friend and he says, come to the medicine empty, leave full, and then act, you know? And so how do you integrate and act, like, on behalf of the plants, and sir, do what they ask of you and inspire you to do?
Well, I think the most important thing is approaching any experience with absolute humility, not trying to control anything that happens, and then listen and see and allow the process to happen and surrender. Because when there is that receptivity and that humility and that trust in the
Hmm.
spirit of the plants, they're ancient spirits full of wisdom, and they will teach us. And then it's about how we honor the information that they give us, because every experience that I've had has been different, because it has to do with whatever I was going through in that particular moment in time. So it's not always the same experience. It can be very different. They know exactly
Hmm.
what you need at every moment. They are biologically perfect. They know exactly. They scan you and they show you.
Hmm.
And so it's about honoring. I've honored the information that I've received in my experiences, whether through, alchemically integrating through the music that I play in a ceremony, or maybe through writing a poem or journaling, and also giving myself time and silence to integrate. The days after a psychedelic experience, I make sure that I can rest and have some
Hmm.
nice juices and nourish myself and give myself the time to reflect about the perceptions and the visions and insights that I received, so I can really
Hmm.
integrate it in my brain and my system, and it stays present in my awareness in the times to come.
Right, right. And so what was, can you give us an example of maybe some of the messages that you received and then how you went on to live that? What changes you had to make and what actions you had to take to honor the teachings?
Oh, I could write a whole book about that. It's so much, so many, so many. I don't know where to start. Um, well, in the beginning, the first ones, when I was like in my early 20s, it had a lot to do with trusting and letting go of fear, Um, and then when I started to work with San Pedro and with ayahuasca, it became very specific on those specific moments. I remember my first experience with San Pedro. I had a very big heart opening experience, and I had this message coming through, which was healing through singing. And when you flow through your heart, there's nothing that will stop you. That was one of the
Hmm.
messages. Um, and about deeper stuff, one of my most recent ayahuasca experiences was very deep into ancestral trauma, and that was very interesting as well. Um, there was a ceremony that ayahuasca showed me of fMRI of my brain, and I was seeing my brain like a medical exam, and the vision was showing me exactly what was going on and what was
Hmm.
there. And at beginning it felt very overwhelming, but then she pulled me into a moment, and I went into a very deep moment that I had. It was like she was showing me exactly where it was in my brain, and then she zoomed in and showed me my father. My father has a trauma, has a war trauma, and he lost his right hand with a grenade, and he has always suffered from PTSD. And I've always had a very challenging relationship with him, because I want to follow, and I've always wanted to follow the path of healing, and he's very resistant to that healing. So we have a challenging relationship. Um, so the plant helped me to understand what had happened, so I could understand him on a deeper level. She showed me the image of him lying down without his hand, and when I came back, I understood. Oh my God! Now I understand. I saw what happened. I was there. I felt it, and it was in my brain because I'm his daughter. So
Hmm.
also this dimension of ancestral trauma. Is very important that we dig into that, because um, that trauma that he experienced, I inherited it in my brain, but I
Hmm.
have the choice now to see it, to understand it, and to realize how that plays out in my life as a pattern, and try to do something different. So
Right.
that's
How
also
what
one
how
of.
was it
Mm,
playing out? How was it playing out in your life as a pattern?
well, I've always had the tendency to be very hard on myself,
Hmm.
a bit like he has always been, also because there's a stigma with mental health in Portugal, and that's just the way he is. He never seeked out treatment for his condition, so he has lived
Hmm.
with PTSD all his life. um but yeah, for sure, I have moments that I'm very hard on myself, and I close down instead of opening up and reaching out, and also because I feel more comfortable serving than actually asking for help. So it's
Mm,
important that I see that sometimes I have that pattern in me as well. It's a shadow aspect that I needed to
right.
see. Yeah.
And so are you still sort of kind of opening to asking? Like, because I can see that from some of your projects, like certainly require collaboration. You know, it's like you're doing some cool things with probably like a lot of people. And so,
In terms of work things, you know, and
uh-huh.
dreams and projects, it's very easy for me to ask for that collaboration. It happens in a very fluid way. It's more
Hmm.
and more like vulnerable stuff, like more personal upheavals in my life that I find it more challenging, but it's much better than it was.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Now I take care of myself much better.
Right. Will you tell me about another time? Tell me, yeah, I mean, we're still getting to know each other. You know, I'm
Yeah.
still just very curious about this journey. And it seems like, you know, you've worked with, you know, lots of different medicines. You say you told me before that you're using combo pretty regularly,
Hmm.
and that is also sort of purifying you and keeping you healthy and
Oh
part
yeah.
of your self-care regimen.
Cambo is amazing. Cambo is amazing. I discovered it uh 2016, 17 more or less, but I only felt
Hmm.
the true calling a year later. And I was a bit resistant to it because I knew how intense the process of purging with it was. And I was
Hmm.
thinking, oh, I've done so much work with ayahuasca. Maybe I don't need Cambo. And then 3 years ago, I went through a very difficult breakup, and
How
I felt
dare
very.
he?
I was a she,
How
but
how dare she?
it's okay. It's what it is.
Hmm.
But it was a very hard breakup because it was someone that I love very deeply.
Hmm.
So I had a period of depression after that breakup, and it was a very deep depression, like one of the most severe depressions I've had in my life. And I had a dream that I was finally meeting Kambo with this therapist, and she had a white gown and some blonde hair. And I went on in the internet to search if there was Kambo therapists in Portugal. So I discovered someone that was just like what I had dreamt, and I said, I need Kambo. I want to sit with the medicine. I need some healing. I'm going through this, and I think it will help me. And then I went to meet her, and we did a session, and it was the only thing that brought me out of depression that I was going through, because I had been 2 or 3 months. It was very hard to overcome that loss. It was really, really very devastating for me, and it was the
Hmm.
only thing that brought me back, you know. And I remember purging and vomiting and feeling my brain chemistry aligning again. And there's something that Kambo has, which is it did not give me any visions. It was just
Hmm.
this energetic emotional cleanse that made me feel like I was 9 years old again, and I was like full of energy and just wanting to do things again. And I
That's
had a
amazing.
very, yeah, and the epiphany that I had when I sat with Campbell was um, that I should never ever punish myself for the pain that other people have caused me in any way. You know, ultimately, of course, it was my ex partner's choice to follow her path, and I needed to respect that and accept that. But
Hmm.
but I was still carrying unresolved resentment towards it. So I needed to let go of that resentment, because that resentment would was building up and creating, you know, not very positive tendencies in my being. So I really needed to go to the root of that pain, and purge it out, and understand that I needed to, you know, keep going with my life. But Campbell really gave me like a kick in the butt to do it.
Hmm. That's awesome. I wish somebody had come to me. In 2009, I had a breakup that just slammed me. And I just laid in bed and ate bad food for like the better part of a year.
Hmm.
And, if somebody had just been like 2 or 3 months in, here's some combo, that could have saved me 6 months of junk food.
Yeah. because we all have coping mechanisms, when we've experienced
Hmm.
this extreme pain of loss, it really opens the pain, and we as human beings, we need connection, and losing that connection is devastating. So we
Right.
find comfort in all sorts of ways, and sometimes we take our time to be able to confront our pain. Everybody has their own timing to grieve. Grief is a very big taboo in our society. We are not
Right.
educated to deal with grief, because grief is necessary. Grief is something that we need to go through when we experience any sort of loss, and if we don't go through all the grief, we don't heal. We don't move
Hmm.
those layers of emotions, and there's a lot of emotional blockage in our culture. We're not equipped to deal with pain and with grief. It's something that we learn by ourselves as we go through the journey.
Well, how do you see that changing? What would you like to see instead? What would be like a healthy, so let's say there's a community or a culture and they deal with grief in a healthy way. What does that look like?
Well, it looks like support. People asking for support, people being supported, being encouraged to be vulnerable. Opening up to the comfort, um, being supported on a psycho-spiritual level, being able to feel what they are feeling without being, told that, oh, you need to get over it, you need to be positive. No, you need to feel exactly what you are feeling, and it
Hmm.
has to be accepted. There's a lot of wisdom in sadness, there's a lot of wisdom in grief. So yeah,
Right.
I think with this, we cannot have pain shaming in our culture.
Right. I'm picturing grief yoga, where sort of like everybody knows that
Instead
like
of laughter
everybody
yoga,
else,
grief yoga.
well, I had this joke with some friends of mine, this back when I taught yoga, that in pigeon pose, nobody can see you cry.
Hmm.
And because there was this time, this was before the breakup, mind you, that I would go to this one particular yoga class and she would always put us in these long pigeons. And for about 3 months, I cried in that pigeon pose. I didn't really even know what I was crying about. I just knew I was letting go of some stuff. And then after about 3 months, I went into the pigeon pose and I didn't cry. And I was like, oh, okay, that was cool. Like we did that. And wouldn't it be nice to have sort of these kind of ritualized spaces, yoga class, say what, there's a lot of aspects to it, but there's a ceremonial aspect to it and a deep practicing and turning towards yourself. And wouldn't it be cool if there was just like this acknowledgement that in grief yoga class, we just know that anybody could break out crying at any time and it's cool. And we're just going to keep doing our practice. And that's part of the game.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a good one. Yeah,
Yeah.
encouraging crying. Crying is very healing, it's very healthy.
Hmm.
It's like an
And
ayahuasca ceremony. In 1 second you're laughing, in the next second you're crying your eyes out, and it's
right.
fully accepted and supported because it's part of the healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of those ceremonies. Absolutely.
Hmm.
It just strikes me that we talk about safe spaces. Oh, it's a safe space to, be who you are. It's a safe space to have your feelings. And that we have to kind of construct those things very carefully so that they don't get in the way too much of our capitalism. That
Exactly.
there has to be a particular time and place where you can do this so you don't interrupt the normal course of business.
Mm-hmm. Well,
We,
it's interesting. Sorry, keep going. Sorry, I
oh, and I
didn't
was
want to
just going to
interrupt you.
say that, and then that makes it a privilege,
Hmm.
right? It's
Hmm.
all of a sudden, it's a very privileged thing to be able to feel your feelings because it means you have enough time and space and support that you can you can take a break from the grind to have a feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and not
Exactly.
everybody can.
Exactly. Exactly. Capitalism is a very abusive system. It's abusive in every way, and it's a cyclical abuse that plays out in so many layers of our human experience. Psychological, emotional, our time, everything. There's like this fast financial dictatorship that contaminates our existence,
Hmm.
and the feeling is very necessary, because all this epidemic of depression that exists because of capitalism, that has its origin
Hmm.
in the pressures of capitalism system. It's a huge storm of emotion that's unresolved and suppressed inside of our systems. And for sure, we need to grieve in safe spaces, and also find that communal space. But I also feel that pain and grief are something that also we need to experience when we go through a very hermit kind of phase.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's necessary to go into the underworld, into the Hades kingdom, and be in the Pluto, archetype of our being, because yeah, because we need to die several times in our lives. We go through several
Right.
deaths during the same lifetime. And sometimes we need to go through it alone as well for some time. And if we're always supported and surrounded, sometimes we don't go as deep as we have to really shed the skin from the core, from the most visceral parts of our being. I feel that women, because we menstruate and we have a menstrual cycle, we have that cyclical death that happens every month, even if we are aware of it or if we pay more or less attention to it. Biologically, it's happening, whether we see it as something sacred and we honor it, or if we're speeding up with life and we're not able to give it much attention, but it's happening in some way. And I think for men, sometimes it's a bit more challenging for them to dive into those emotions like that and have that emotional purge. Um, I think it can be more challenging for them because they are even more pressured. They have a lot of pressure as well. Um, and also culturally, they suffer that pressure, and what it means to be a man. And, it's the patriarchy is violent for women, but also for men, not just for women. And so I also feel that having the courage to feel those emotions also by yourself in your cave, it's a very
Hmm.
healing part of the process as well.
It is indeed. And yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, where men are allowed to have outlets. And I'm thinking about things like they're all very physical, in my mind. There's like sort of contests and battles and sporting events and war.
Spartacus.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And, it's interesting to, try to explore healthy masculinity, of
Hmm.
course, and also the ways that are sort of normal in our culture for men to gather and have a little bit of quiet and respite. I, for a period of time, smoked cigars. Um, just kind of through accident. There was a medicine man who ran ceremonies at my yoga studio, and I was hanging out with him afterwards. It was like just the two of us outside the studio, and he started smoking a cigar. And I was like, that's really interesting. And he was like, here you go, smoke a cigar with me. And I was like, okay. And it was sort of like that solitude you were talking about, but it was just like, we were alone, we were alone together. And it was a quiet time. There wasn't too much chatter. It's the kind of thing where you sit, we would sort of sit and stare off in the distance. And, after a pause, somebody would say something and then there'd be another pause. And I discovered that an old friend of mine, and so that I went, the next week I went into a cigar shop and there was another old friend of mine there. And he was like, well, I manage the cigar shop now. And I was like, really? And so I sort of got initiated into this community of men from all walks of life who would sit quietly and sometimes animated, and smoke cigars together. It was this really interesting wave. And there weren't these huge vulnerable breakdowns necessarily, but there was this quiet community that I that is unique. It's a really interesting space. And then, I stopped smoking cigars because gross. And, but it was a really interesting time. It was another interesting kind of moment of sort of exploring, different communities.
Yeah, and it's good that we don't have a polarized view about anything, because anything
Hmm.
can be medicine, anything can be poison. It's just how we do it, you know. Tobacco is a sacred plant. In the
Hmm.
shamanic tradition, tobacco is as important, if not even more, than ayahuasca in a ceremony, because
Yes.
it's the energy that protects and grounds the space. So just the way that it's been commercialized by capitalism has kind of demonized it. Um, but anything can be medicine, anything can be poison. And
Yeah.
also, for example, and it's a very cultural thing as well, like in Portugal, also like in our patriarchal structural patriarchy, you know, boys are educated to be very strong and not to be sissies and not cry and all that stuff, like especially the generation before mine. In mine there's a
Right.
lot of transformation happening, of course, but before it was very hard. And alcoholism is a serious issue, you know, with older men, like men in their 50s and 60s, even 40s. There is this coping mechanism of drowning the pain with alcohol. And that's something that exists in Portugal, and I think all over the world, like finding the comfort in alcohol in a destructive pattern. And alcohol in itself is a very celebratory type of substance. You know, if we go back to Nietzsche and Origin of Tragedy and Dionysus, it can be such a liberating experience, you know, to celebrate, to go beyond inhibition. Um, but it has become a legal drug that's created so much destruction because it's abusive, it's self-abusive, and then it creates all sorts of physical abuse in families. So there's also this miseducation about what addiction is, and that addiction is a disease, and anything can be an addiction, even games can be an addiction. So sometimes when I
Even what
speak,
can be an addiction?
like games, TV, anything can
Right.
become an addiction, you know, anything can become an addiction, a person can become an addiction. So so when I speak to people that still put, you know, psychedelics all in the same bag and they call it drugs, for me it's kind of like, you don't know what you're saying, because then I see them smoking and drinking and engaging in all sorts of destructive habits that are so poisonous to their beings, and I just think this is just ignorance. You know, the seeds of
Yeah.
ignorance spread through the fear that people have of losing control, but at the same time this cultural weight of laws, you know, like what are laws, you know, the laws were created by people that have limited views, so laws constantly have to change and adapt to the awareness of the times. But you know, sometimes the financial interest is so heavy, you know, that it's hard for people to think for themselves, and that is one of the most
Hmm.
important things that psychedelics have given me, is my independent thought, my direct experience and my independent thought. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so much of that is internalized. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our integration circles, because we hold circles every Wednesday on Zoom, for people to talk about their journeys. That's our thing. And it's really interesting for people to work on dismantling and stepping out of that judgment, because they've taken it on themselves and they make it mean something about themselves because this is what their path looks like. And these are the choices that they're making for themselves. And even though they're getting amazing results and they're actually healing and they're letting go of things and they're seeing new possibilities, they still hold on to the fact that they're bad or not good enough or not worthy or, broken or wrong. And that's one of the nice things about being in the community, is that the other people offer a mirror that they get to look around and be like, well, wait, all of these people are smart and successful and kind and wonderful, and they're all doing it. So maybe I'm okay too. It's really
Yeah,
cool to see that connection be made, you
exactly.
know?
Yeah, to break
I,
free of self-judgment and the fear of other people's judgment as well, because the psychedelics
mhm,
put us in a state of timelessness. And then when
yeah,
we tap into that state of timelessness, like all those conditionings lose their weight on us. We start seeing
right.
things as they actually are. not as the baggage of cultural
Mhm.
injections that we've been given.
Right. And overwhelmingly, if they do get judged, they're being appreciated, right? Because there's, this back and forth. People will share their experience and other people will share their insight on it. And you see people who kind of didn't think very much of their opinion, people who showed up very quiet and shy, and then they, work up the courage to be like, well, that reminds me of this. And somebody else is like, oh my God, thank you so much. Right. And they recognize that their input is valued and that they're accepted kind of by the group, that they're approved of. It's
The
like
magic
really, really
of
cool.
exactly the approval, the validation with like-minded spirits. That's the magic of the circle,
Hmm.
when there is a circle and there's unity. It's very beautiful because the things that people share are the things that the person next to that person was going to say, and that's the magic of the circle, that everyone is equal, we all mirror each other. And yeah, that approval, that validation is so important in such a delicate topic, and
Yeah.
in gentle environments of integration, which is so essential. The education for integration is essential for this process,
Yes.
because
And
there is also the aspect of escapism connected with psychedelics. So if people can be educated to see that it's about the integration of the learning of seeing these substances of as as
right.
gifts from nature, um, that perception can change and that judgment can be lifted.
And that also, alongside with all of that, that this integration is important and that it can also be fun. Sometimes I feel like people think integration is for people who had a tough time, that they had a rough time in their experience. They're like, oh, I should go to integration circle and work it out. But, we see that there's increasingly a kind of celebratory attitude, and a fun about it, and which is different than what we expected. And that's the point. I'm throwing this event in April called the Integration Jam. The point is to like kind of honor the fact that we've also been gifted like these amazing experiences, these amazing insights, and that integration is like a wild ride. It's like, a joyful journey into the future, and an expression of like the deep love that we felt from these plant teachers. It's like, how do we continue to be agents of evolution and love in honor of what we've been given?
Exactly. And I think it also creates consistency for the personal growth that you experience as you start this journey. Because
Hmm.
when people have peak experiences and they don't integrate, it just becomes this up and down, up and down, up and down. It becomes very polarized. But when there's the habit, the good habit of integration, of integrating experiences, then it becomes very consistent in a very good road a very consistent, practical road of personal growth that's very tangible in your experience, and as your life starts to unfold from a different space.
Yes.
And also because ultimately all the shadow aspects come from trauma, come from pain, come from emotional blockages that we have. And if
Hmm.
when we access the psychedelic visionary state, we understand that it's all energies, it's all frequencies, and it's all
Hmm.
patterns to be seen, to be understood, to be loved, to be dissolved. But ultimately we have to accept ourselves as we are instead of judging. I think that the judgment is really what we need to break free from, and that's what the integration helps with.
Right. And
And
also recognizing, I like that you're using the term frequency again, because it reminds me that these things aren't binary, that it's not just like a flip of a switch that's like trauma or love. It's
mhm.
this continuum. And that, it being energy, it's just energy expressing itself in more fluid and healthy and open ways, or energy kind of stuck in more frustrated ways. and that sort of kind of massaging that trauma open, that, it just lets more love in and out over time until love becomes the default. It's not
Exactly.
like you can just, go in, and this is the silver bullet thing. It's not like people can just expect to go in and flip a switch and then they're healed, right? It's an energy. I mean, those miracles do happen, but primarily, for the most part, what we're looking at is traveling on a continuum back to light.
Hmm. Hmm. And knowing when to return when we lose sight of that light, because life will throw things at you constantly. We may have a
Mm-hmm.
very blissed out experience, but then if we experience trauma again, we become re-traumatized, and we need to remember that light again and maybe go through another healing process. It's never ending. It's not like
Right,
it's not a state that you reach and then you stay there forever. It's just a state that you tap into, and you know that reminds you of home and
right,
of
right. Yeah,
wholeness
we're
as well.
and wholeness as well. Yeah, and we're just dancing, back and forth.
Yeah, we
Um,
oscillate, we oscillate, we all
mhm.
oscillate. Yeah.
And then also, sometimes, with these kind of missions or visions we have about things that we want to do and create, or who we want to be, and then all of a sudden we notice, oh my God, reality didn't get the memo. It's like, oh, I'm gonna like be this amazing person and do this amazing stuff, and then reality is like, clean your room. you know, it's like,
Exactly.
it's like, I'm gonna be an amazing musician, and they're like, can you play any instruments?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's why we need to grow on every chakra, not just on crown chakra, because
Right,
psychedelics, when they are visionary, they open your third eye completely and they open your crown chakra and you feel connected with everything. But ultimately, we cannot get lost in infinity. We know the infinity is there, but there's a reason why our bodies do not allow us to process DMT because they
mm-hmm.
know we have a physical body. We need to be rooted, we need to ground, we need to be practical, we need to deal with the practical things of our life. And then it's about integrating the ego in a healthy way, not killing the ego, but realizing, okay, this is my boat to navigate this dimension. So I'm going to take care of this body. I'm going to take care of this being. I'm going to work on my individuality and enrich myself so I can contribute to the whole. But it has to be a very personal process as well. It's different for everyone. Everyone's experience is very personal. And
Right,
of course, everything that exists as a potential in us, and that is beautiful, that happens with entheogenics, is with entheogens, um, is that they awaken the divine in every person. In my case, it was channeled a lot with music, but with other people, it's through painting or to massaging or writing or building, whatever it is. But whatever becomes stronger that was of your potential is heightened by these visionary states. But of course, you still need to work. You need to be practical about it and put it into practice.
mm-hmm.
So also, of course, the grounding. A few years ago, that was an impression that I had when I went to a lot of spiritual events, that everything seemed very crown chakra, and it cannot be just crown chakra. We cannot dissolve into the whole without having a strong root. A tree only reaches the sky because it has roots, and we have a root chakra for something. So
Mm-hmm.
so of course we need to be practical and real with things so we can integrate these epiphanies into our lives.
Right. It is so important, and also very. It's you're this talk about, being embodied is so important, because so often people show up and they're like, I just want to kill the ego.
Hmm.
And what I'm hearing them say is, there's a lot of stuff about me I don't like.
And that's ego.
And that's ego. It's
Paradoxically.
only the ego wants to kill the ego. The pure presence behind the scenes could care less. Let it do what it wants. The ego's gonna do
Exactly.
something. And so it's like this self-hatred we have, and this self-judgment drives us to want to death, drives us to want to be dead. Instead,
Yeah.
if we could find
Yeah.
a little bit more love for ourselves, maybe we would get better results.
Yeah, it's like it's a very interesting layer to all this dimension, which is like the spiritual ego is very tricky, and spiritual materialism is real and exists.
Hmm.
And to me, it means that the journey is not going through the heart. No,
Right.
ultimately, this is all to put us back into heart-centered consciousness, into kindness, into humility. But because the egoic consciousness is such a poison in our collective awareness, we just distort all those experiences and into a godlike figure of ourselves, and it's narcissistic, you know, the narcissistic energy that starts to come forth when we want to attain a state that we think is it. You know, I want to be like that, so I'm gonna shut out all of this, and then it's just like shadow aspects, you know. But it's very
Hmm.
paradoxical. It's very paradoxical. But for me, uh, and I do this when I every time I went to work with some facilitator or shaman to work with, to learn from. That's also always what I look for: kindness and humility. If
Right.
I don't feel kindness and humility in someone's energy, I don't want to learn from them, because for me it's just spiritual theater.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I tend to want somebody who laughs as well.
Yeah, exactly. Not
Um,
taking
I,
themselves too seriously, and being able to laugh with the depth, with the darkness, you know, with
mhm.
authenticity. Exactly.
I
Yeah.
was I was watching. Do you know Hamilton Morris? You ever watch the Hamilton Morris show? Hamilton's
No,
Pharmacopoeia.
no, I don't know who it is.
He's you know what it is?
No, no, I don't know. I'll have to check it out.
He's a scientist. He's like a chemist, scientist, researcher, and he basically travels the world and talks to people about different plant medicines. And basically ends up doing a lot of drugs on camera. And he was at a peyote ceremony with this, um, Native American guy who does peyote ceremonies. And during the ceremony, the guy says, some teachers think that I don't have enough respect for the peyote because I'm serious, because I'm not serious enough. Let's try to be serious for a while. And you look at the two of them, and then all of a sudden they sort of change their posture and they sit up a little straighter, and then they look at each other and they're just like, we can't do it. And they laugh some more, you know?
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
was that seemed to be part of the medicine,
Hmm, hmm.
is laughing, and letting us laugh.
Yeah, of course, there has to be moments for everything. You know, there has to be moments for really going very deep into the process and honoring the plant. But also, if the plant wants you to laugh, you need to laugh, because, you
Hmm.
know, plants that reset our chemistry and they boost our dopamine, our serotonin. Of course, we're going to have moments of laughter, of rapture, and sometimes that healing happens in crying, and sometimes it's through laughter as well, and that's so welcomed. But yeah, it's the traditional side of things. Yeah. I remember, I think it's good that we have very different approaches, and that we can experience and take different things from different teachers, from different modalities and different ways of working with the medicine. For example, with ayahuasca, when I started working with ayahuasca, it was through Daime, Santo Daime, the Brazilian
Right.
religion. And it was great that I had my first experience with ayahuasca through it, because although there are sorts of concepts that further along the line I wanted to break free from and have my own direct experience, it taught me what it means to do inner work, true inner work. And so it's a very disciplined kind of ritual, but it was necessary to understand what it means to work in our inner, through the help of a plant. It gives you a guideline. But at some point, I decided I also want to do a Shipibo traditional ceremony. And I did a
Hmm.
ceremony with Don Jose with black ayahuasca. And it was very different. It was much more shamanic. And and then a few years later, I also was a part of a ceremony called the Jam of a Lifetime in Holland. And it was a bunch of musicians and facilitators that had a lot of experience in different sorts of traditions, but they wanted something a bit more open, that would have
Hmm.
specific icaros, specific songs, and they knew how to work with the medicine. They were experienced as facilitators as well and guides, but they wanted to bring forth artists and creators and thinkers to be in a space that was also encouraging the spontaneous channeling in the moment with the medicine, through the medicine. So not having even the format closed. It was like 50% uh, um, grounded format, and then 50% of the ceremony was open format for if people wanted to dance, or they wanted to write a poem, or they wanted to play a song that they were channeling in that specific moment. So this
Mm-hmm.
balance between honoring the traditions of this millenary tradition, but at the same time allowing the openness, because the spirits are alive, the plants are alive in this moment in 2021. Although they live in timelessness, they have things to tell us right now. And all of us, we all have this direct experience to connect to God if we want to. It's our
Mm-hmm.
privilege, our birthright. So it's good to keep that openness as well, so that
Right.
everyone can access it and it's accessible to everyone.
I can't believe that I missed the jam of a lifetime. And so how was it? Did you enjoy this sort of more modern neo-shamanic experience that happened at the jam?
It was beautiful, and it happened in such a magical, synchronical way. It was surreal. When I look back at
Mm-hmm.
it, it was such a blessed experience, the way that it came together, and I knew the people, and it was really lovely. Uh, yeah, it was a great experience. It was great. It was something that I was also yearning for, because I'd come from the Daime, from some Shipibo, also retreats and ceremonies, and that was also an insight that I was receiving. Since these spirits put us into different states of awareness, how the potential for learning in a different state of mind is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And also something that I do when I'm in ceremonies, when I stretch, when I do yoga, or when I write, anything that exists in each one of us as a gift, and that is deepened and expanded and amplified through that state of consciousness, like the downloads that we can bring forth are infinite. So this, to come back to what you were saying about the laughing and the tradition and the being serious. So I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a point of balance that can exist between these two approaches, which is, of course, taking the work seriously, but
Right.
being playful at the same time, doing both, being playful, doing it with joy, with love, but of course taking it seriously. And it's not dualistic. It's necessary.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's it's I think it's spiritual materialism that you like you're saying, it's like I look more sacred and holy because I'm solemn for some reason. Whereas we know that isn't really consistent with reality,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that in a lot of ways, our personalities are a little bit arbitrary, and oh well, you know what, but this might be it. So I laugh a lot out of joy, and delight. I've got I've got a toddler, and I'm delighted by him, and I'm consistently laughing, and he's consistently laughing, and it's so wholesome. I think a lot of time what ends up happening in with humans is we end up laughing at somebody else's expense. That
Hmm.
there's this kind of laughter that denigrates or puts one above, or is fueled by aggression or cruelty.
Hmm.
There's humor at the expense of something else, or there's something like that, somebody else's pain. And people can be so conditioned. If your trauma is that you know you grew up in an environment where you're continually like maybe shamed and laughed at, I can see how maybe laugh. I'm just riffing here, I'm just guessing. um, as opposed to sort of allowing ourselves to kind of grow up with a natural expression of joy.
Hmm.
um, I think that in Sanskrit there's a word pranava, and on one of the definitions is om. It means the syllable om. Another definition is a roar of joy. and it's the roar of joy. It's the sound that sets the worlds in motion. So it's like the vibration that begins the universe isn't like a mumbled sad ohm.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
it's like an intense, powerful, joyful, vibratory expression.
Yeah, definitely. Joy is so important in all of this. Yeah. Definitely joy is a very high vibration, a very high frequency, and it's very beautiful because when we fall into that excessive seriousness and we go into the rigidness, then we lose
Mm-hmm.
the joy of it. Yeah, exactly. Although it's very beautiful that sometimes we cry until we laugh, or sometimes we laugh until we cry, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not dualistic. But yeah, joy is so important. I remember that the first spiritual teacher that I met, when we went to his, when I started going to listen and to go to his retreats and everything, there was always laughter. There were moments that were
Yeah.
very hard, but there was always laughter. But it was a very full laughter. It was a laughter that was full of substance, of reckoning, of uh, of laughing at ourselves, in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
but not in a in a negative way. But yeah, but it's the egoic consciousness tends to to have that cognitive dissonance with laughter, for sure.
Right. You just reminded me of this time I had a friend who um she invited me to this retreat. There was a Buddhist monk he was on tour and he was doing a weekend retreat. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. And she was like, well, at least come to like the after party. Like there was sort of like a Sunday night or a Saturday night event that was like just for donors. And she had like donated some money. And so she was allowed to come to this kind of dinner. There was a buffet kind of thing. And, his serious students and people who'd give money were allowed to go. And I was invited. And so I'm there, and there are all of these kind of um, students who were kind of a little bit uptight. They were all like trying, like this was their teacher and they wanted to like be on their best behavior for him and things like that. And so there was they weren't having fun at this thing. And I'm just sort of sitting at the edge, I'm sitting at the edge and I'm kind of joking around with this friend of mine, this girl I was dating, my girlfriend at the time. And I think she's even like a little uncomfortable that like I'm cracking jokes and having fun and things like that. And at some point, this lama, this Rinpoche, looks at me and he was like, "You come here." And I was like, "Me?" He was like, "Yeah, you sit here." And I sit down and he looks at me. And this was really interesting. I don't know if she told him or if he was just psychic. He goes, "You were just in Nepal." And I was like, "Yes, Rinpoche, I was in Nepal, about 3 months ago." And he was like, "I was in Nepal recently too." I was like, "That's wonderful, Rinpoche. What did you do there?" And he looks me up and down and he goes, "I smoked hash." And I said, like a good yogi, and like he slapped me on the knee and started laughing and laughing, and we're laughing and laughing. And then he talked to me about his record collection for a half hour. He was like, "I have the Rolling Stones album. It's the first edition." And like, I was like, "That's really cool. I have, this one." And the guy just wanted to hang out.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
he had done his whole dog and pony show. He was serious all weekend.
Exactly.
He
Yeah.
did he shared the Dharma. He relieved suffering on all the three worlds, and he just kind of wanted to hang out. And none of his students were giving that to him. They were
Yeah.
still kind of really stuck in
The
whatever they were stuck
parts,
in.
in the appearance,
Yeah.
and the parts, and the social parts. Yeah. That's very funny. It's like that video of the Dalai Lama when he farts in an interview. When
Mm,
people, like he was, I think
I
he had,
missed that one.
yeah, I think he was in a plane or something, and he really needed to fart. And then I think the interviewer asked him, "So how did you deal with it?" And he just like, "Oh, I just did like this," and then he just moved and farted like in the interview, and everybody cracked up.
Right.
I just relaxed and I just farted.
Right.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
this
because
is
really,
a very, yeah, this is a very important lesson, to not take ourselves too seriously, to do things with joy and be very human, be very authentic.
mhm. And
It's like
these
when
are
you connect
guys who
with someone.
sometimes,
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
I would say it's like when you connect with someone, when you first fall in love with someone, and you know that the moment of connection, it happens when you have that. I don't know if this happens to you, but for me, a lot of moments that I fall in love with someone, it's when we start opening up about our most uh um darkest things, and then it ends up being something that bonds us, and we laugh about it, and that's like, that creates the affinity of reality,
Hmm.
that acceptance of being real, of
Yeah,
being true, of not, of not wearing a mask.
right. And keep in mind that these are guys who sometimes have been through like enormous hardships,
Hmm.
have been, chased from their homeland by the Chinese or imprisoned and tortured and things like that. And, it kind of puts things in perspective.
Totally.
It's like, you survive. That's one of the things that I also really like about the psychedelic experience is that I always seem to survive. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's a little bit terrifying, and then you make it through and it's just like so refreshing. It's like, oh my God, we did it.
Hmm.
I'm like, I'm good as new or better than new. And it almost makes you feel like, yeah, you can do anything. If I can survive that, then what's the big deal about this other stuff?
Hmm.
If I can face the hardest parts about myself, and also, beyond just the psychological, some of the realms that we visit, because people want to talk about the shadow all the time. Like it's just, it's like, sure, I visit my own psychology, but sometimes I end up in other weird places too,
Hmm.
right? They don't exactly seem like this isn't just like stuff that happened to me when I was a kid. Like I'm in a weird place that doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Hmm.
There's other characters here and intelligences that I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do to me. Am I going to be okay? It's like, yeah, apparently you're okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, sometimes we go very deep into our own psychology. Other times we go into more maybe collective spaces of the human awareness. And also, I think the hardest experiences are when we create any sort of resistance, because when we feel nausea and other uncomfortable sensations in our body, those are things that we
Mhm.
need to see. They can be personal, or they can be universal, but there are things that cause discomfort and nausea in us, and we need to get them out of our system. Sometimes we go into the collective as well, into the collective pain.
Yes,
Yeah.
the collective pain. Yeah, indeed. And that's always really interesting to navigate, and sort of interesting to sort of pull out of our system for the benefit of all beings, which
Exactly,
is
because
really
tragedy
interesting.
opens our hearts. Exactly, tragedy opens our hearts, for sure,
Hmm.
to make us more compassionate.
Hmm. And then also, it seems like there are kind of these global forces that have a lot of power because people are plugged into it and giving their power to it.
Hmm.
And, and we are sometimes unconsciously complicit in that darkness.
Hmm.
And the more people go in and be like, oh, like, we're talking about patriarchy, for example. Um, it's, you know, I'm going to actually plug out, I'm going to disconnect, and it gets a little smaller. That energy gets a little weaker, you know, and and what does it take, for a system to collapse, especially when that system is imaginary, is for people to stop believing in it.
This is very complex. Yeah, it's very complex because
Hmm.
it's a parallel. I once had a dream with Charles Eisenstein. He came to Portugal a few years ago, and I really like the way he thinks and how he sees things and how he explains them. And and I had a very beautiful dream with him. And the dream was a bunch of people like surrounding buildings that I understood that were the archetypes of the system. And everybody was trying to shake those pillars so they would crumble and
Hmm.
fall, but they wouldn't fall. And eventually people gave up and they just walked backwards and they all joined hands. And that's
Hmm.
when it all fell, metaphorically. So I think this journey that we're on, capitalism is not going to die. It's going to die hard, and we need to be very realistic about it. That it's not going to be easy. So it's really about our individual choices and what we create as alternative systems for us to be able to
Right.
reduce our dependency of it. And it's not going to happen overnight. It has been happening, for the past 20, 30 years, since Starhawk, and so many other visionary pioneers that exist and have started to talk about all this, like Vandana Shiva and so many. Um, so I think now we are in a reset point as well in our awareness, where we have to make conscious choices based on what we can see now, and see that.
Hmm.
But I think it's going to happen from the peripheries. It's like as I'm going to use the metaphor of mushrooms here, but if things spread like mushrooms, if people start joining locally and regionally, and on the regions, and creating all sorts of networks of support, then it will spread out like mushrooms around the hierarchies and the pyramids. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of trust.
Hmm.
And we are all very scarred from the selfishness of the human being. So I think psychedelics play an important role in all of this, because they restore that connection, that trust, that ethics and that integrity that we have lost. But it's a very parallel path, because if we become polarized, we will be crushed. But there are alternatives. We have to keep creating that momentum and be there for each other, because we all need each other, because it can feel like we're being crushed as well. I think lots of people feel crushed right now, but those
Right.
that have already seen things for what they are not surprised by what is happening. So there's a lot of things happening as well, lots of positive things happening, but we are constantly bombarded with what's what's not good. But we
Right. Yeah. I
need
mean,
to
that's
we need
that's very well said.
you
Oh, you
know
were just going to tell us what do we need to do?
well, I'm I don't know. I'm still learning myself, but I don't want to preach about it. I'm still learning. I've been inspired by so many people that have done amazing things. uh,
Hmm.
but also in my day-to-day life, I'm still trying to find that balance, I know that I'm part of the system, but I try to find ways not to be closed by it. And in the period of lockdown, we feel confined in so many ways, and
Hmm.
but we need to expand. This is a year to expand as well.
Yeah.
So I think also it depends on who we are talking to, because, for example, if we are talking to people that have already taken psychedelics for a long time, and that have already done a very deep process or a long process of questioning reality, it will make a lot of sense. But for people that are going through a lot of hardships, um, it needs to be more gentle.
Yeah. Gentleness is super important. And also kind of not the way we were raised in a lot of ways. But I would love to talk. We've been going for quite some time. This time has kind of flown by, and it's been really great talking to you. What if we talk like a little bit about your music though, or something? Let people
you
kind
know
of know about your projects. If you're planning on performing anytime soon, like what is it like to be you as a musician in this time?
um, well, this time forced me to start creating lives, to playing lives with better sound quality. So I geeked out on OBS. to learn how to use it so I could stream my concerts online, so I could keep on playing music and connecting with people through my music. Yeah, it started a year ago that I've started to really improve the quality of my live transmissions so I could get better sound. I've also have periods of incredible creativity in which, having so much free time because of the lockdown, I was able to dive into music again and compose and write. Music has done a big difference for me during this lockdown. Also, the music that I listen to and that I search for as a refuge of sanity during this whole time. Definitely, the artists that inspire me have been balms for my soul. Um, and yeah, I just started to learn how to work with Ableton 2 years ago, so I'm going deep into Ableton, producing music, composing in different ways, because I've always played guitar and charango and piano, and now I'm learning to use all the other tools to compose with other instruments and sounds. So it's been very mind-blowing to dive into this. um and yeah, I have a bunch of open projects that are still open and works in progress, but they're not all finished yet. I'm still working on them. But everything I've done is in my channels, in my pages, in my YouTube, Bandcamp, and
Oh, right on. We'll put
Facebook,
all of that
Instagram.
in your. We'll put all of that in the show notes. Is there any one thing in particular that's very, very exciting?
I don't know, sir. Well, there's a piece that I created for a dancer, that's going to premiere this month for a project called It's Cirque Life. It's like a worldwide competition for artists, and that's going to
Mm-hmm.
come out this month. And it's a dancer called Daniel Rojas that I met in the Sound and Silence gathering, and I made some music for his dance. So I'm really looking forward to share that with the
Nice.
world. Um, um, I also finished the soundtrack with Nayoba that we're gonna release soon for a water movie. It's an ecological movie about the cycle of water and the importance of water, and we created some music for it. I'm very excited also about that. I
Mm-hmm.
also did a track with Kraut, which is a producer from Holland, and it's super cool. He sent me some tracks with percussion sounds, and I added the charango and the voice. And he's a really joyful guy. His music's super uplifting and super magical, and I'm really, really looking forward to share that with the world as well. And yeah, I want to finish also my new work because it's very, very different from the works I've done before. It's a totally different sound, and yeah,
That's awesome.
I love collaborating. I learn a lot through collaborations, and it's great. It's great. Yeah,
Very, very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming and being on the show.
my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Is there anything that you want? Did we miss anything? Are there any words of wisdom that you want to kind of go out on that you want to leave for the people?
Yeah, there's a sentence that's been in my mind the last few weeks and months that I saw. I don't know who said it first, but it's something that's been very deeply resonating with me in these times, which is
Mhm.
stop trying to feel good and become better at feeling.
Mm, that's awesome. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, to really
Well, thank you.
squeeze. Yeah.
Cool. Well, again, thank you. I'll just kind of do our outro, and then Skylar will take us out. We can just kind of chat backstage a moment.
All right.
All right, so everybody, you've been listening to Instrumental Breakthroughs. I'm your host, Daniel Shankin of Mount Tam Psychedelic Integration. My guest has been Theresa Gabriel, who you can find at teresagabriel.pt and on Facebook and Instagram at Theresa Gabriel Music. Please also check out the Mount Tam Integration Jam at psychedelicintegration.family. Thank you again so much to Deadheadland and to Livestream Remote, and have a wonderful week.